talking to Jodie Moule. Jodie is a UX designer, and she's also the author of SitePoint's book, Killer UX Design. The book was written as a case study of the development and design of her app, Cook, which launched in 2013. So Jodie, you're here to tell us a little bit about UX and talk about the process of building a mobile app. Can you tell us first about the primary function of UX? So it's user experience, but what exactly does that entail?
So I suppose the UX is, the philosophy generally is about understanding and embracing the customer throughout any kind of design and development process. So when we're talking digital and app land, that means that, involving them through the whole design process from the beginning to end. When we're talking broader landscape, it's just about understanding your customer. So what are the methods and processes that you can use to do that, gain a better understanding?
So when you're gathering information about your users, how exactly do you make that happen? What questions do you ask?
So I suppose the thing that differentiates UX from standard market research is the methods. So I would always say that the best method for getting to know your users or customers is to go into their world. So what does that mean? It means going into their homes, going into their workplaces, and using that deeper understanding of how they do things, not only with products that are related to yours, but other things, and how does that impact their world.
How do you do that when you're researching to develop an app or a website?
Yep. So, what we did for Cook through the book, and you'll see that documented, is that we actually recruited people that we thought matched the end kind of target users, and I emailed ahead to them and I said, you have to do a little bit of homework. We want you to think about how cooking affects your world and what cooking means to you. And they then had to create like a poster kind of artifact that's pictures and words. And then I also said to them, I'm going to come, I want to watch you prepare a meal, we're going to sit down and we're going to eat that meal, and then we're going to talk about, what cooking means to you, basically. And so it's setting up a framework in some instances where you're getting to observe as an apprentice or passively in a lot of senses. Like, I'm not there to talk a lot to them, I'm there to listen to them talk. And, now and then trigger like, talk me through why you did that, or blah, blah, it's just sort of like you're a conduit, I suppose, for them explaining their world.
That sounds almost clinical.
Yeah, it is a little bit. And I suppose that harks to the approach we take. And my personal background is I'm actually a psychologist. And when I first started out in this career, I didn't think that being a psychologist was going to be as handy as what it actually is. But when you go into context, it's about behavioural understanding and behavioural observation. People don't always articulate very well what they do or why they do it. So you need to be able to look at and observe their actions and the contradictions perhaps between what they say and what they actually do. And that's where you can get into trouble. I suppose that's where I made the initial comparison between market research and UX. So focus groups, a room full of people, you're expecting them to know why they do stuff. People make things up. They, when challenged especially, you're like, why do you do that? Oh, because blah, 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 blah. I'm on the spot and I'm sort of forced to say and forced to articulate, and sometimes people don't really know why they do what they do, mainly because much of what we do is habit. About 40-50% of what we do is out of habit. It's automatic reactions that is keeping our brains sort of a bit more relaxed because there's so much processing going on. So yeah.
Your app is specifically, it's a tablet app, it's an iOS app, and it was released around the launch of iOS 7.
Yes.
And it was featured quite heavily by Apple as one of the apps that were designed for iOS 7, and it's, I have to say, it's quite beautiful and really handy. What were the challenges in building the app specifically? What's different in UX design for an app, for a mobile app, rather than for a web app or for a website in general?
I have to say, the way that we approached the research and the design of the app, it didn't matter that it was going to be for tablet or mobile. What mattered initially was about understanding the landscape. So knowing what products and services were out there already, understanding the way that customers behaved, and we had a hunch. Like, we had this hunch that people kept a recipe scrapbook. So, I refer to it as a hunch that any product owners would have a few hunches about what's going to work or why is this initiative going to be worth undertaking. I'm an avid cook, I love cooking, and so we had a hunch that, like myself, I suppose, people keep a little recipe scrapbook, but it's not very effective. You've got paper everywhere, you run out of book space, you've then got a mix of books, cooking books that line your shelves, you use some of the recipes, not all of them. There was no effective way to digitize all of that and keep it all in one space, so that it was there forever, basically. So yeah, that was the initial hunch, that people probably have very messy systems, and this would be a way to help them manage that world. So yeah, when we got out in the world, it was true. There was a lot of people that did have those ways of storing content, and yeah, very messy, very ineffective. And that in effect is why you go into research in context, because you identify the design gap. Like the design gap that people talk about is this thing that tells you, hey, there's an opportunity here. People are having trouble here. If you build a product around whatever they're having trouble with, you're quite likely to fill a gap in the market.
In the book, you write a lot about the importance of sketching out your design and sketching out the process. How did you actually do that in the real world when designing the app?
Yep. Look, sketching is a really critical thing for a designer to do on their own, with others. It's a form of sense making. So just like when you go out into the world and you research customer behaviours, one of the best things you can do is talk about it with others. I saw this, and you're trying to make sense of what you saw in your mind. In a similar way, sketching is a sense-making process. So you're trying to think about, okay, I'm now going to sit down and visualise how this needs to be. What are the interactions, and how is that going to affect this thing here and that thing over there? And it's also just a way for the group, everyone involved. So the whole Cook team was constantly in workshops and constantly drawing out what they thought, and everyone did that. Didn't matter whether you were a designer or not, or whether you were a developer. Everyone sketched out what they thought was the way to approach the problem and tackle it. And then we became more and more refined as we went.
Do you have to be a UX designer to know about UX? When you say you get input from different parts of your team, is there something that developers, for example, bring to the table when it comes to UX?
Absolutely. I would say that with Cook, one of the things that really makes it sing is some of those subtle interactions, like the book opens and it lifts, and that's something that's a mixture of design and dev. So what can and can't be done from a development point of view is critical to know. But also, what's possible, those little micro interactions or wow moments, I call them in the book, that make things sing, that make people go, oh, that's cool, that they almost they almost don't notice, but it's something tiny that makes them sort of sit up and go, oh, that's really nice, someone's thought about that. So yeah, I think that there's sort of a real interplay between design and dev, and making sure they're working super closely together and evolving at the same pace, which is of course why agile environments have taken off, because the two things coupled and working closely and refining design as you're refining the code in the back end is just really critical to success.
So when we think UX, we often think in terms of interfaces, of what the user is actually going to be using and touching and clicking on. How do you get the whole team involved in that when they're not necessarily going to be involved in the interface?
It's funny because one of the first things I did in the book was to define UX, and I'm amazed at how hard I found that process, because over the years, what that means has evolved. So I started my career as a usability expert, and then I moved as a user-centered designer, and then I was a UXer, and all the time, we're just broadening out the definition. And I quite often see when people hear UX, they do think interface. But in my world, the philosophy is not just interface. You're thinking about a whole combination of environments and worlds that come together that allow you to design better, that allow you to think about what will make the interface really useful for someone. And it's the broader landscape that allows you to do that. One of the activities you could do that we always do whenever we kick off a project, and also with the Cook team, we did a lot of it, was to just storyboard out, and storyboard not about the interface, it was broadly like, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And so, we call them 8-ups. You could sort of have it's like 4 little boxes, top and bottom on an A4, and across each box you're telling a story, you're telling that human side Actually, that's probably the main thing. You've got to remember the humanness of what is the human reason we're doing this. And it's not about pixels at the start of it. And it's, you've got to remember all the way through. There's a human need we're helping solve a problem to. And there's a human reason. And there's a human at the end of this thing when we get out there. Let's not forget the humanness of what we're trying to create. And I think it's easy to get lost in it when you're very digital, to just be like, just moving the pixels this way or that way. It's sort of, remember the human, remember the person, which is why a lot of teams have success having personas and things like that up on the wall, to just go, hey, actually, Judy over there, she really likes to cook before she goes traveling, and therefore she researches different countries, and then she starts cooking that food before she goes overseas, and she likes to explore different countries, the food they eat before she goes somewhere, and that's, it's those kind of stories and that kind of human understanding that then allows you to build design features within your digital environment that helps answer and help facilitate those kind of things.
I've talked to a lot of teams that don't think personas are something you need to do anymore. What's your take on that? Do you still use them?
Well, it just depends how sophisticated your team is, to be quite honest, and how big. And I think when you're a small, discrete team, the way that we used personas and the way that I actually went through them in the book was to initially frame our assumptions. So who did we assume was our target market? And that helped us then recruit. Did we then refer back to personas throughout? In some ways, we were more likely to refer back to individual stories from users that we saw to help illuminate a point. But we're a small team, we're 4 people. When you're a bigger team, and maybe some corporates that we work with have like 20 people, they're not all UX designers, they're not all devs, they're not all human focused. I think they're very effective in that sense, to just remind you that it's not about you or me and the battles that we might have about who's right. It's more about this person out in the suburbs that is using the product in a really low fidelity kind of way that we can't even relate to because we're so immersed in technology. So they can be effective.
That's a good point as well, being so immersed in your own technology and in technology in general that you lose track of how people are going to use your app.
Yes.
Was that an issue with Cook, with an app that's based around something as old-fashioned as cooking?
Yes, yeah. Well, I think it's a subtle sage reminder that, don't jam in too many features and simplify. In fact, that's one of the things that what did we learn through the journey and what's the reflective moment? I think that the reflective moment is that it's very, very hard to exercise the discipline to remove, to lessen the amount of features, to actually say, no, we're not going to put things in because we need to get our user base ready for this change and this design, and then we'll slowly release things. So I think that's a really critical point. Simplifying, removing, restraint. It's very hard. It's actually really hard.
Within the Cook team, how was that process of both working with each other to add and to remove and to make sure the app was, as you say, human-centered?
Look, I think that it's 4 people in the room that were hugely passionate about the product, all had different skills and backgrounds, and so bringing all of those experiences to the table is what also makes Cook sing. We've all got a different approach and philosophy, but we all care a lot about the details and we care a lot about the product. But we're also empowered to make decisions and not have anyone say, no, you can't do that. We're a typical startup in some senses, that whole mentality of why not? We can do it this way. Why wouldn't we do it that way? And building from scratch. So there's quite a luxury in that in some ways. We're not dealing with legacy or things that mean that we can't do things a certain way. Constraints, I suppose, lack of constraints in a lot of senses, which is, empowering as well as challenging, I suppose, in some sense.
So thanks for coming in, Jodie, and talking to us about UX design.
Thank you.
Jodie is the author of Killer UX Design, released by SitePoint in 2012. The book's available on Learnable, and the app that was case studied in the book is called Cook. It's available at thecookapp.com.